And we just got done reviewing Baton, one of the biggest movies of the year, one of the biggest movies of the decade. Highly recommend you go and watch that. Go to the theaters, pack the theaters, because they're still probably playing this thing. But we're going to move on to a different type of a movie. We're going to be talking about Gandhi Godse, which was a movie that I think is, I think this movie needed to be made in the way because personally, me, this is a story that I didn't really, quite know. Now, this is kind of like historically fictionalized, so I don't want to say that everything in this is accurate, but I think it's kind of a cool play just to kind of see how certain things might come to be, had certain events not happen, and also just kind of see too like who might step up to actually fill the role that this movie is depicting. So this movie is essentially talking about it's talking about two divergent viewpoints in a historical fictionalized circumstance where Gandhi actually survives the assassination that killed him. And this movie like really starts to explore kind of the tussle between two different ideologies that Gandhi and Godse, represented at the time. As so the war as well that kind of were disrupting and dividing these forces. And trying to get the point across, it does a act that appears to negate the gravity of the crime committed by Nathuram Godse. And the fault of such a storyline is also that in the facilitating in the ideology debate, somewhere in the script, we're just kind of seeing this big nationalist point of view that's supposed to, not only depict that viewpoint, but also to kind of juxtapose with, what the other diverging viewpoint might be. So, just kind of going in, I think this movie really did mean well. Like, I'm not necessarily saying that this movie got the point across quite well, but what I'm saying is when I was in the theater, whenever I was watching this movie, I really felt to me that I was thinking about, maybe not only what would have happened, but what needs to happen right now for someone to kind of step into this role and, kind of bring, two dividing forces together. The movie's based on a play actually by a Hindi writer, Asghar Wajwa, who was also, he penned the film's often pointed dialogues, but there's a lot of contradictions, in the ideologies. There's kind of, I'm not going to say there's favoritism. You do kind of see a little bit of this nationalist point of view that's, highly coming across, to the audience. I think this point of view might be, just to add a little bit of drama, just to add a little bit of, camaraderie, maybe within, the wherever you're watching it from. But ultimately, like I said, this comes off a little jarring in that kind of way. I think the screenwriting, I think some of the technical aspects of this are pretty good. Like they do try and make this be a dramatic type of film, as well as that, one to kind of just, poke, very important questions. I think it's an interesting essay of like the hyper nationalism that India sees in the current times. But, if this film, had a little bit of more work to try and maybe, figure out what the solution might be to bridge these two ideologies, to create an India that can, better satisfy both of those sides, maybe that would have been, a step in the better direction. But I do think it's highly important for a film like this to be made because there's not a lot of dialogue in the Hindi Bollywood space that can properly address it. I think this now leaves some room for a film to kind of move in and do that job. So those are ultimately my thoughts. Tasha, do you have anything to add to that conversation? I know I tried to unpack a lot right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really covered it very well. I think I don't know if our viewers over there out in the radioverse, if you guys had seen the Gandhi movie that was made, kind of on the Western side. But it's interesting to see the portrait of his character painted in two separate ways. One from like the view of a Western society where, he's Gandhi, and the one from an actual view of like people who lived there, people who made, this movie with like our kind of Indian audience, and actually just made by Indian people. Like what is the story they're trying to tell and how is it different? So I thought this was a pretty like, it's a unique kind of portrait of Gandhi and yeah, of his assassin too. And you don't really talk about those kinds of people when you're talking about such a huge historical political figure. So I thought that perspective was pretty interesting for a film to go that kind of in depth on that issue was actually really impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said too, in terms of proper execution, I definitely think there are some pros and some but I think this really leaves room for a really big, impactful film to just kind of come in and do the job that this film here, set up. Really would love